evening, I'm Sarah Farsclub with the main news-making headlines around the world. Australia will drop military equipment and aid to Kurdish forces in northern Iraq. Iran's president calls sanctions against Tehran illegal and a crime against humanity. Thousands of protesters clash with police near the Prime Minister of Pakistan's house. And the European Union is giving Russia a one-week ultimatum to scale back its intervention in Ukraine. His Highness the Emir Sheikh Sabah Al Ahmed Al Jaber Al Sabah sent a cable of condolences to His Excellency the President of the People's Republic of China, Xi Jinping, on the victims of the landslide that hit Western China, claiming several lives. His Highness the Deputy Emir and Crown Prince Sheikh Nawaf Al Ahmed Al Jaber Al Sabah sent a cable of condolences to His Excellency the President of the People's Republic of China, Xi Jinping, on the victims of the landslide that hit Western China, claiming many lives. His Highness Sheikh Jaber Al Mubarak Al Hamad Al Sabah, the Prime Minister, also sent a similar cable of condolences. His Highness the Emir Sheikh Sabah Al Ahmed Al Jaber Al Sabah sent a cable of congratulations to His Majesty King Al Mu'tasim Billah Muhibbuddin Tuanku Al Hajj Abdul Halim Mu'azzam Shah ibn Al Marhum Sultan Badli Shah of Malaysia on the occasion of his country's National Day. His Highness the Deputy Emir and Crown Prince Sheikh Nawaf Al Ahmed Al Jaber Al Sabah sent a cable of congratulations to His Majesty King Al Mu'tasim Billah Muhibbuddin Tuanku Al Hajj Abdul Halim Mu'azzam Shah ibn Al Marhum Sultan Badil Shah of Malaysia on the occasion of his country's National Day. His Highness the Sheikh Jaber Al Mubarak Al Hamad Al Sabah, the Prime Minister, also sent a similar cable of congratulations. His Highness the Emir Sheikh Sabah Al Ahmed Al Jaber Al Sabah sent a cable of congratulations to His Excellency the President of the Republic of Kyrgyzstan, Almazbek Atambayev, on the occasion of his country's National Day. His Highness the Deputy Emir and Crown Prince Sheikh Nawaf Al Ahmed Al Jaber Al Sabah sent a cable of congratulations to His Excellency the President of the Republic of Kyrgyzstan, Almazbek Atambayev, on the occasion of his country's National Day. His Highness Sheikh Jaber Al Mubarak Al Hamad Al Sabah, the Prime Minister, also sent a similar cable of congratulations. In other local news, His Highness the Deputy Emir and Crown Prince Sheikh Nawaf Al Ahmed Al Jaber Al Sabah received this morning at Asif Palace Diwan His Highness Sheikh Jaber Al Mubarak Al Hamad Al Sabah, the Prime Minister. His Highness the Deputy Emir and Crown Prince then received the First Deputy Premier and Minister of Foreign Affairs Sheikh Sabah Al Khalid Al Hamad Al Sabah. His Highness the Deputy Emir and Crown Prince also received the Deputy Premier, Minister of Interior and Acting Minister of Awqaf and Islamic Affairs Sheikh Mohammed Al Khalid Al Hamad Al Sabah. Moreover, His Highness the Deputy Emir and Crown Prince received the Deputy Premier and Minister of Defense Sheikh Khalid Al Jarrah Al Sabah. His Highness the Deputy Emir and Crown Prince later received the Deputy Premier, Minister of Commerce and Industry, and Acting Minister of Education and Minister of Higher Education, Dr. Abdul Muhsin Mudij Al Mudij. Meanwhile, His Highness the Deputy Emir and Crown Prince received the Minister of Information and Minister of State for Youth Affairs, Sheikh Salman Sabah Al Salim Al Hamoud Al Sabah. His Highness the Deputy Emir and Crown Prince then received the Minister of State for Cabinet Affairs and Acting Minister of Justice, Sheikh Mohammed Al Abdullah Al Mubarak Al Sabah. Finally, His Highness the Deputy Emir and Crown Prince received the Acting Speaker of the National Assembly, Yaqub Abdul Muhsin Al Sani. The First Deputy Premier and Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sheikh Sabah Al Khalid Al Hamad Al Sabah, received the credentials of the newly appointed U.S. Ambassador to the State of Kuwait, Douglas Allen Silliman. The credential presentation ceremony was attended by the Acting Foreign Undersecretary, Ambassador Sheikh Ali Abdullah Al Ahmad Al Sabah, Director of the First Deputy Premier and Foreign Minister's Office, Ambassador Sheikh Dr. Ahmed Nasser Al Muhammad Al Sabah, and Director of the Protocol Department, Ambassador Dhari Ajran Al Ajran. The First Deputy Premier and Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sheikh Sabah Al Khalid Al Hamad Al Sabah, received the credentials of the newly appointed Ambassador of the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland to the State of Kuwait, Matthew James Lodge. The credential presentation ceremony was attended by the Acting Foreign Undersecretary, Ambassador Sheikh Ali Abdullah Al Ahmad Al Sabah, Director of the First Deputy Premier and Foreign Minister's Office, Ambassador Sheikh Dr. Ahmed Nasser Al Muhammad Al Sabah, and the Director of the Protocol Department, Ambassador Dhari Ajran Al Ajran. The Palestinian leadership has reached a consensus to turn the international community to seek a new UN resolution for the withdrawal of Israel to the 1967 border agreement in a new diplomatic endeavor. More in this report by Fatma Abdul Karim from Ramallah.
In a new elaboration of the political plan the Palestinians are now after, seeking the establishment of their state on the borders of 1967. Senior political sources said Abbas's plan is a three-phases process and is put as a national priority and is coordinated among all factions.
Initiative of Mr. Abbas is to go for the United Security Council demand for ending the occupation during limited date or limited time. And if the United Nations or the Security Council refuse this, it means all the Palestinians should think about what is the future step.
The Palestinians will first turn to the US in order to resume the peace talks with a focus on the issue of borders. But if not, the Palestinians will seek a Security Council resolution calling for Israel's withdrawal from territories occupied in 1967. But if Israel also fails to comply, Palestinians will resort to all international organizations, including the International Criminal Court.
It's clear that there is a Palestinian consensus in going to the ICC. Therefore, it's a matter of time. Sooner or later, the Palestinian Authority is going to join the ICC and to pursue some Israeli officials for some war crimes. Particularly the settlements.
According to different sources, Palestinians will offer to resume talks backed by the Arab League, but also with a defined time frame. Israel has for long evaded from the question of the borders on the negotiations table, while Palestinians have continuously stressed on the importance of pointing this out in the talks. Otherwise, there would be no point of working towards a two-state solution. Fatma Abdul Karim, Kuwait TV, Ramallah, Palestine.
Iraqi forces have reached the besieged town of Amerli in northern Iraq, where thousands are being trapped by IS militants. The apparent breakthrough comes after the U.S. carried out airstrikes overnight on the militants' positions near the town. The operation to reach Amerli began yesterday when an alliance of Iraqi government forces, militias, and Kurdish Peshmerga began a two-front attack on the IS positions. 15 IS fighters were said to have been captured. In other related news, Prime Minister Tony Abbott said Australia would join in an airlift of military equipment to Iraq after a request from the U.S. government. The U.S. carried out airstrikes against the militant group known as IS near the besieged town of Amerli in northern Iraq and airdropped humanitarian aid to civilians trapped there. U.S. President Barack Obama authorized the new military action, broadening U.S. operations in Iraq amid an international outcry over the threat to Emirati's most ethnic Turkmen population. A U.S. aircraft delivered over 100 bundles of emergency supplies, and more aid was dropped from French, British, and Australian planes as well, signaling headway in Obama's efforts to draw allies into the fight against the IS militants. The United Nations says 32 Philippine peacekeepers trapped by rebels in the Syrian Golan Heights have been rescued. The head of the Philippines Army said another group of 40 peacekeepers escaped a 7-hour siege by the rebels, said to be from the Al-Qaeda-linked Nusra Front, after returning fire in self-defense. Rebels have taken 44 Fijian peacekeepers captive and have also seized a crossing point into the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. The peacekeepers are part of a UN Disengagement Observer Force, or UNDOF, in place since 1974 to maintain the ceasefire between the Israeli and Syrian forces there. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani said the new U.S. sanctions were against the spirit of Tehran's nuclear negotiations with world powers, but added he was not pessimistic about the talks continuing. The United States penalized a number of Iranian and other foreign companies, banks, and airlines on Friday for violating sanctions against Tehran, largely tied to a decade-old dispute over its nuclear program. The Foreign Ministry spokesman Marzia Afkham said such actions put into question the seriousness, honesty, and good faith of negotiations with the U.S. Iran and Washington, France, Germany, Britain, China, and Russia failed to meet a July 20th deadline to negotiate a comprehensive agreement under which Iran would curb its nuclear activities in exchange for the easing of economic sanctions that have been crippling its economy. The new deadline was extended to November 24. Members from all parties are set to meet on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly session in New York in September. Thousands of anti-government protesters tried to raid the official residence of Pakistan's Prime Minister, sparking clashes with police that killed 3 people and wounded nearly 400 amid cries for the Premier to step down. The protests began with a march from the eastern city of Lahore on Pakistan's Independence Day on the 14th of August, as Imran Khan and fiery cleric Tahir al-Qadri had called for protesters to join. Officials said demonstrators demanded Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif to step down over allegations of massive voting fraud in the election. Backed by Parliament and many political parties, Sharif has refused to step down, as negotiators have also tried to convince Khan and Qadri to end the protests. The protesters' presence and heightened security measures have grounded much of life in the capital to a halt. Despite tough rhetoric criticizing Russia's increasing military involvement in Ukraine, European Union leaders earlier today stopped short of imposing immediate new sanctions against Moscow. However, at the close of the summit on Sunday, the 28-nation bloc's heads of state and government tasked their executive bodies with preparatory work for tougher economic sanctions. Our reporter Dina Nasser has more on this story.
UK Prime Minister David Cameron said a timetable had been set out for further sanctions and warned Russia it risked being isolated if it continued to escalate the crisis in Ukraine.
Well, it's a deeply serious situation, and we have to show real resolve, real resilience in demonstrating to Russia that if she carries on in this way, the relationship between Europe and Russia, Britain and Russia, America and Russia will be radically different.
The EU and the US previously imposed sanctions on Russian businesses as a deterrent to further destabilizing Ukraine.
It is totally unacceptable that there are Russian soldiers on Ukrainian soil, and we have now set out a timetable for further sanctions, what could be, in the text, significant steps, and that's important.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel expressed concern at the very significant inflow of troops and material from the Russian side into Ukraine, but said Germany would not be sending weapons to support the Ukrainian military at the present time. French President François Hollande echoed her comments, arguing that sending military aid would be more likely to maintain the conflict than bring an end to it. NATO said this week that at least 1,000 Russian soldiers are in Ukraine. Another 20,000 Russian troops are amassed just across Ukraine's eastern border. The US and EU have so far imposed sanctions against dozens of Russian officials, several companies, as well as the country's financial and arms industry. Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko, attending the EU summit, said he was hoping for a political solution but warned that his country was on the brink of full-scale war as shelling continues in the rebel-held eastern Ukrainian city of Donetsk, and Kiev said Russian-backed rebels made gains in the east. Russia has repeatedly dismissed accusations from Kiev and Western powers that it sent soldiers into Ukraine or supported pro-Russian rebels fighting a 5-month-old separatist war in Ukraine's east.
China's legislature ruled out open nominations for elections to choose Hong Kong's leader. Authorities said 2 to 3 candidates will be nominated by what it called a broadly representative committee. The decision is expected to limit the selection of candidates to pro-Beijing figures. The pro-democracy Occupy Central movement says it will launch a sit-in in the city's central business district in protest. The movement condemned the decision, saying it dashed people's hopes for change and will intensify conflicts. The election for Hong Kong's chief executive is due in 2017 and will be the first time the holder of the post is directly chosen by voters. The director of the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, Tom Frieden, along with other CDC doctors, visited an Ebola isolation center in Conakry, New Guinea. The Ebola outbreak ravaged West Africa began last year in Guinea itself. Since then, the disease has spread to Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Nigeria. More than 3,000 people have contracted the disease, which is spread by bodily fluids, and for which there is no licensed treatment for the vaccine. A separate Ebola outbreak was also reported this week in Congo, where 13 people have been killed from the disease there.
If there's anything good about Ebola, it's that we know exactly what to do about it. If we make it safe to take care of people, whether in home or in centers, and we make it safe to bury people who've died, Ebola goes away. Communities that have done that in many parts of Guinea have been able to stop chains of transmission and are Ebola-free now. The challenge is that the region is really one entity, and it's so important that we get it right in all places. The question of isolating areas, or cordon sanitaire, has come up, and I think the most important thing to be clear about is that we want to support the individuals who have Ebola, their families, and their communities. If we do that, then people will come in for care. If we do that, then we can reduce the chain of transmission and we can stop the disease. That's the key. We have to increase our support of the disease.
And finally, the Kuwait Stock Exchange's 3 main indices closed collectively in positive territory as the price index climbed 26.7 points to close at 7,430.51 points. The weighted index gained 1.6 points to close at 492.5 points, while the KSX 15 index went up 3.1 points to close at 1,200.41 points. As for market figures, today's session saw the ceiling of 5,986 spot transactions compared with 4,659 in the previous session, worth a total of 25.16 million Kuwaiti dinars against 21.43 million KD. In the preceding session, with more than 277.3 million shares changing hands. With that, we conclude our news for this evening. Please make sure to join us for a brief at 11. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at MOI Kuwait News to see our daily news bulletin again, including all of our reports, or follow us on Twitter and Instagram at MOI Kuwait News. That's all for now, and here are the headlines before we leave you. Australia will drop military equipment and aid to Kurdish forces in northern Iraq. Iran's president calls sanctions against Iran illegal and a crime against humanity. Thousands of protesters clashed with police near the house of the Pakistani Prime Minister. And the European Union is giving Russia a 1-week ultimatum to scale back its intervention in Ukraine.